Time Prisoner, One Girl Lost in Ancient Egypt, Episode 1. The desert wind moved like a warm breath across the ruins as Carol Reed knelt beside an ancient stone slab, brushing away grains of sand that shimmered under the late afternoon sun. Cairo stretched behind her like a restless heartbeat, but out here, among the broken pillars and half-buried walls, she felt the quiet weight of 3,000 years pressing close. She pushed a strand of blonde hair behind her ear and leaned in. The carved figures on the slab were clearer than any she had studied. The lines were sharp, almost too sharp for something this old. Her blue eyes narrowed with curiosity. The symbol spoke of a royal burial, a curse against intruders, and a woman whose name had been erased from history. The closer she looked, the more she felt a strange pressure in her chest, as if the air itself was reacting to her presence. Her professor called out from behind her, reminding her that the sun would set soon, but Carol barely heard him. Something pulled her deeper into the chamber. She moved past a collapsed column and reached a narrow stone archway. The temperature shifted abruptly. The hot desert air gave way to a chill that should not have existed underground. Carol hesitated, but the lure of discovery drew her forward. Inside, the chamber was small, almost perfectly square, with walls scratched by the passage of time. At the center stood a sarcophagus carved from dark stone. Its lid was decorated with the image of a woman wearing a crown. Beneath the dust, Carol caught the faint outline of a royal sigil. She lifted her flashlight, and the beam revealed an inscription curving around the edges like a warning whispered straight into her ear. The one who touches the seal of the forgotten queen shall walk into her unfinished fate. Carol frowned. She murmured that it must be a mistranslation, but her voice sounded thinner than usual. She adjusted her gloves and reached out to trace the sigil. The stone was colder than ice. Before she could pull her hand back, the ground trembled. Sand poured from the ceiling. The light flickered. A sudden gust of wind swept through the sealed chamber, impossible and violent. Carol stumbled backward, catching herself on the corner of the sarcophagus. A ringing sound filled her ears, drowning every rational thought she tried to hold on to. She called out to her professor, but her voice disappeared into the roaring air. The chamber brightened with a blinding blue light. She covered her face as the sigil under her hand ignited like fire trapped beneath glass. The world lurched. The sand beneath her feet vanished. The cold stone dissolved. The air thickened and warmed, scented with incense instead of dust. Her knees hit the ground hard, and when she opened her eyes, the chamber was gone. She found herself kneeling on polished white stone beneath an open sky. The sun was higher, brighter, harsher. The noise that reached her was not wind or excavation chatter, but the rhythmic stomp of soldiers' sandals and the murmur of a gathered crowd. Carol pushed up on shaky arms and turned around, heart racing so fast she could barely breathe. She was standing in the center of a grand courtyard. Towering columns rose on both sides, wrapped in colorful paintings of gods and kings. Silk banners floated in the hot wind. Hundreds of people filled the space, dressed in linen and gold, their eyes fixed on her with shock and confusion. Carol's breath caught in her throat. The realization fell on her slowly, frighteningly, with no mercy. This was not Cairo. This was not her time. A voice rose above the crowd. Deep. Firm. Commanding. Who dares trespass into the court of Pharaoh? Soldiers parted like a tide, revealing a young man walking down the stone steps of a raised platform. His dark hair framed sharp features, and the collar of gold at his neck glinted under the unforgiving sun. His posture carried the absolute certainty of someone born to rule. His eyes, the shade of obsidian, locked onto Carol with suspicion and something sharper underneath. Carol froze. She had seen pictures of Egyptian kings in textbooks. She had studied sculptures and masks. But nothing had prepared her for a pharaoh in the flesh. He descended the last step, stopping only a few feet from her. The crowd held its breath. His voice was softer now, but colder. State your name, stranger. Carol swallowed, her throat dry as sand. Her mind fought to make sense of the impossible, but her mouth acted on instinct. My name is Carol. Carol Reed. A flicker of confusion crossed his eyes, quickly replaced by a guarded intensity. He lifted his hand slightly, and 2 guards moved closer. Carol raised both palms, trying to steady her voice. "I do not mean any harm. I swear I was not trying to trespass. I was in Cairo and then something happened and I ended up here. Please, I am not your enemy." Whispers surged through the crowd. Some pointed at her hair, others at her clothes. She could feel their fear, their fascination, their distrust. The pharaoh's gaze tightened, studying every inch of her as if she were an omen carved into the sky. "Your appearance is unlike any woman of my kingdom," he said. "Your clothing is strange. Your speech is strange. You claim you came from nowhere. That is not possible." Carol tried to control her trembling hands. She knew how unbelievable she sounded, but she had nothing else to offer. A guard stepped close, gripping her arm. She gasped but did not resist. She could not fight hundreds of people, much less an entire ancient empire. The pharaoh raised one hand, signaling the guard to hold her but not harm her. His eyes kept returning to hers, dark with suspicion but also with a sense of curiosity he could not hide. "Until we discover who you are," he said slowly, "and what you are, you will be held under the authority of the crown." Carol felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. The soldiers tightened their hold, guiding her toward the palace entrance. As they led her away, she dared one last look at the pharaoh. He was still watching her. Not with hatred. With something more dangerous. Interest. The guards escorted Carol through the towering stone gate, their sandals striking the floor in a steady, intimidating rhythm. She tried to steady her breath, but the palace rising before her made it harder with every step. The entrance hall stretched wider than any museum gallery she had ever walked through, painted walls glowing with images of gods, battles, and royal ceremonies. The heat was heavy, scented with oil lamps and burning incense. Every sound echoed as if the stone itself was listening. People stepped aside as the guards passed, staring openly at her blonde hair, her strange clothes, her trembling hands. Carol kept her arms close to her body, trying not to stumble. She whispered to herself that this was impossible, that she had to be hallucinating from exhaustion, but the floor beneath her feet felt solid, too solid. The guards halted just inside the main hall. A woman approached, dressed in linen white and adorned with bands of gold around her arms. She looked to be a high-ranking servant or advisor, her posture sharp and her eyes observant. She studied Carol with a mixture of disbelief and caution. "Where did you find her?" she asked the guards, but her gaze did not leave Carol. "She appeared in the royal court," one guard answered. "Pharaoh ordered her to be held until further command." The woman frowned. "She looks like no one from any kingdom we know." Carol took in a breath and forced herself to speak. "Please, I do not want trouble. I did not choose to come here. Something happened when I touched the stone, and I ended up in your courtyard." The woman blinked, clearly not understanding a word. Carol realized that whatever she was saying might as well have been poetry in a foreign tongue. She tried again, slower, but the woman simply raised her hand, signaling the guards. "Pharaoh will decide," she said, voice cool and formal. "Until then she is to be watched." The guards pushed Carol gently but firmly into a long corridor lit by torches. The hall felt quieter here, insulated from the outside heat. They stopped before a heavy wooden door bound with iron. One guard unlatched it, and they motioned her inside. The room was larger than she expected. Its walls were decorated with painted lotus flowers and blue tiles, and the floor was covered with woven mats. In the corner sat a small basin of water and a folded linen cloth. A single window high on the wall let in a narrow beam of sunlight. Carol turned to the guards. "Please, do not leave me without telling me anything," she said softly. "I just want to understand where I am." One guard hesitated, his expression briefly softening, but he soon stepped out and closed the door behind him. The heavy latch fell into place with a solid thud. Carol stood alone. The silence pressed on her, thicker than the heat. She walked slowly to the window and looked out. She could see a sliver of the palace courtyard, white stone, tall columns, and in the distance the top of a grand temple. The sun shone brighter than any midday in Cairo, as if this world had no filter between earth and sky. Her throat tightened. She pressed her palm to her chest and whispered, "This cannot be real." But it was. She closed her eyes, trying to recall the exact moment the world shifted. The glowing symbols. The rush of air. The cold sigil under her fingertips. She remembered the warning carved into the stone. The forgotten queen. The unfinished fate. Her stomach twisted. She sat on the edge of the mat-covered bench, hugging her knees, and tried to breathe slowly. Her father would be worried. Her friends would wonder where she disappeared to. None of them could reach her here. The door opened suddenly. Carol jumped. A servant girl stepped inside carrying a tray of water and bread. She was young, with dark eyes and a quiet expression. She placed the tray near Carol and hesitated, as if unsure whether she should speak. Carol offered a faint smile. "Thank you." The girl studied her for a moment before nodding and stepping back. Unlike the others, she did not look afraid, only curious. After placing the tray down, she bowed lightly and left, closing the door behind her. Carol poured a bit of water into her palm and splashed her face. The coolness helped the panic settle slightly. She took a small bite of the bread, though her hand still trembled. Time passed slowly. She was not sure if it was minutes or an hour before the door opened again. This time, the guards entered with a man who moved with the confidence of someone high in rank. His robe was longer, his necklace crafted with colored stones. His gaze swept over Carol with deliberation. "You will be brought before Pharaoh," he announced. "He requires answers." Carol nodded, her heart pounding. She stood, brushing off her pants even though the dust of the excavation was long gone. The guards escorted her out. As they walked through the halls again, the palace felt heavier, more oppressive. Each column seemed taller, each shadow deeper. The closer they drew to the main chamber, the louder the murmurs grew. When they reached the entrance of the audience hall, the guard stopped. Carol felt the heat rising from the stone floor as the massive doors opened. Memphis stood at the top of the steps again, his expression unreadable, his eyes as sharp as polished obsidian. The gold at his collar caught the sunlight like a blade. Carol felt her breath catch. This was no dream. This was the ruler of a world that should have been dust and memory. And she had been placed directly in his path. The guards guided Carol forward until she stood in the center of the audience hall, the stone floor warm beneath her shoes. The crowd was gone now. Only a handful of advisors, guards, and high-ranking attendants remained, forming a quiet semicircle around the raised platform where the young pharaoh waited. The chamber felt even larger without the earlier noise, every sound wrapped in an echo that made her pulse thud in her ears. Memphis watched her descend the last step into the open space. His expression was calm, but the tension in his posture suggested he had already formed more than one theory about who she might be. He rested one hand lightly on the carved arm of the throne behind him, the gold bracelets at his wrist catching the afternoon light. Carol tried to stand straight, though her legs felt unsteady. She kept her gaze on him, because looking anywhere else meant admitting she was terrified. An advisor stepped forward and announced, "The stranger has been brought as you commanded, great Pharaoh." Memphis lifted his chin slightly, signaling the man to step back. His attention remained fixed on Carol. "You claim you are not from this land," he said. His voice was smooth, deep, steady, carrying easily across the wide chamber. "You claim you do not belong to any kingdom known to our scribes." Carol swallowed. "That is the truth." He studied her slowly, as if measuring the weight of every breath she took. "Your clothing is unlike any I have seen. The stitching is unusual. The material is foreign. A traveler could explain such things, but you appeared in my court without entering through any gate." She nodded, forcing herself not to look away. "I understand how strange it must sound. I went into a burial chamber during an excavation. I touched a carving, and the ground shook, and a light, her voice cracked. I opened my eyes and found myself here. Some of the advisors exchanged uneasy glances. One of them murmured a prayer under his breath. Another frowned, clearly displeased. Memphis did not react right away. He descended the last few steps until he stood directly in front of her. Up close, the line of his jaw was sharper, his expression more severe. He circled her once, silent, taking in her blonde hair, her shoes, her jeans, the zipper on her jacket. Everything about her marked her as an impossibility. When he spoke again, his tone was neither harsh nor gentle. It was the tone of a ruler who could not afford to be wrong. Your story does not match the logic of this world, he said. But neither does your appearance. I cannot dismiss what stands before my eyes. He gestured lightly to one of the advisors. The man hurried forward and whispered something into his ear. Memphis listened without interrupting, then raised a hand to dismiss him. He turned back to Carol. There have been omens, he said quietly. Signs in the temples. Dreams reported by priests. Rumors that a stranger would come with the breath of the gods behind her. His eyes narrowed. Some believe such a stranger would bring danger. Others believe she would bring change. Carol felt her heartbeat quicken. I am not here to bring danger, she said. I do not even know how I came here. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the subtle flecks of gold dust on his collar. If you speak the truth, he said, then until I understand who you are, you will not be harmed. But if you lie, his voice lowered. Ancient laws leave me no choice. She held her breath. I am telling you the truth. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Memphis turned his head slightly and addressed the guards. She is to be kept under watch in the east wing, he ordered. She is not to leave the palace. She is not to be harmed. Bring her food, water, and clothing suited to the heat. Report every change to me directly. The guards bowed and stepped forward. Carol let out a breath she had been holding far too long. It was not freedom, but it was not death. She could accept that for now. Memphis watched her as the guards began to guide her away. His gaze was sharp, thoughtful, and something else she could not name. It was not kindness. It was not anger. It was curiosity laced with caution, as if she were a riddle he intended to solve. She turned once before crossing the threshold. He was still watching her. Outside the hall, the corridor stretched long and quiet. The guards led her past tall windows that opened to gardens filled with palm trees and pools reflecting the golden light. Servants carrying baskets of fruit or jars of oil paused to stare at her as she passed, whispering behind their hands. One guard finally spoke, his voice low but not unkind. Do not be afraid. As long as Pharaoh protects you, no one will dare lay a hand upon you. Carol nodded weakly, though the words only made her more aware of how vulnerable she was. She was a stranger in a palace of stone and gold, surrounded by a world that should not exist anymore. They reached the eastern wing, quieter and cooler. The guard opened a door to a modest chamber. It was simple but clean, with a woven mat on the floor, a small table, and a clay pitcher of water. Carol stepped inside and exhaled shakily. She walked to the window and looked out at the bright courtyard below. The people moved with purpose, unaware that their world had just collided with hers. She rested her hand against the windowsill, feeling the warmth of the stone seep into her skin. She whispered, "Please let this be a dream." But the heat, the scents, the sounds, the weight of the day behind her, everything insisted on one truth. She was no longer in her time. And the man who ruled this one had already set his eyes on her. The afternoon sun slid lower across the palace walls, turning the white stone into soft gold as Carol sat on the edge of the woven mat, trying to understand the enormity of what had happened. The chamber was quiet except for the faint rustle of palm leaves outside her window and the distant rhythm of sandals moving through the corridors. Every sound felt sharper, clearer, as if the world itself refused to let her think this was a dream. She rubbed her temples, replaying Memphis's voice in her mind. His tone had been controlled, but the weight behind his commands was unmistakable. He had the authority to decide her fate with a single sentence. That thought alone made her chest tighten. A soft knock touched the door before it opened. The servant girl from earlier stepped inside, carrying a folded bundle of linen. Her movements were careful, respectful, as if she feared startling Carol. "These are garments suited for the heat," the girl said. Her accent was different from the English Carol spoke, but the words flowed smoothly, as if the meaning bridged the distance between their worlds. Carol accepted the folded clothes with a grateful nod. "Thank you." Then she hesitated. "What is your name?" The girl paused before answering. "Nari." Carol offered her a tired smile. "I am Carol." Nari returned a small smile of her own. "The guards told me you are under the Pharaoh's protection." She seemed unsure what else she was allowed to say, so she lowered her gaze slightly. "If you need anything, I will try to help." Carol's chest warmed a little at the kindness. In a place filled with suspicion, even the smallest courtesy mattered. "I appreciate that." Nari bowed gently and stepped out, closing the door behind her. Carol unfolded the linen garments, soft and light beneath her fingers. She changed quietly, placing her modern clothes onto the mat. Standing barefoot on the cool stone floor, she felt the difference immediately. The fabric allowed the warm air to pass through, easing the pressure of the heat. She turned to the window again, watching the palace courtyard come alive with torches as workers prepared for the evening. The sound of a distant drum drifted through the air, slow and steady. It made her heartbeat match the rhythm without meaning to. A sudden stir echoed in the hall. Footsteps. Voices. The scrape of a sandal halting directly outside her door. Carol stepped back instinctively, her pulse quickening. The door opened. 2 guards entered first, followed by the same high-ranking advisor who had stood beside the pharaoh earlier. His presence filled the small chamber with a heavy formality. He bowed his head slightly. "The pharaoh summons you." Carol felt her stomach drop. "Now?" "Yes. He wishes to speak with you privately." The way he said privately made the air thicken around her. She nodded, forcing her legs to move even as tension tightened every muscle. The guards escorted her through the dim corridors, where oil lamps flickered against painted walls. They moved toward a quieter part of the palace, a wing where the noise of servants and soldiers faded until she could hear her own breathing. At last, they stopped at a tall door carved with symbols of falcons and sun discs. One guard pushed it open, revealing a spacious chamber lit by the warm glow of lanterns. Incense drifted through the air, sweet but sharp. Memphis stood near the open balcony, the night breeze tugging lightly at his dark hair. The moon cast silver over the courtyard below, and for a moment he looked almost unreal, like a figure carved from a legend rather than a man of flesh. The guards remained outside as the advisor bowed and closed the door, leaving them alone. Carol swallowed, her heart beating fast. "You wanted to see me?" Memphis turned slowly. The intensity of his gaze felt like a pressure on her skin. He studied her from head to toe, noticing the linen garment Nari had brought. His expression softened for a fleeting second before settling back into something unreadable. "I need answers that you have not yet given," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent beneath it, curiosity sharpened by suspicion. "You appeared in my court as if carried by the wind. You speak of light and shaking earth. My priests speak of omens and warnings. I must know what you are." Carol clasped her hands together. "I am human. That is all. I was studying ruins near Cairo. I touched a carving, and everything changed. I do not understand it myself." He circled her slowly, as though checking whether her story had altered since the last time she told it. "No weapon. No seal. No mark of another nation." He halted behind her. "Yet you arrived in the heart of my kingdom." She forced herself to remain still. "It was not my choice." He moved to stand before her again. The lantern light flickered in his eyes as he spoke. There are those in my court who fear you. There are those who wish me to eliminate any threat before it grows. His voice lowered. But I do not act on fear. Carol took a small breath. Then what do you act on? His eyes held hers without wavering. On judgment. And my judgment tells me you are not a danger, at least not yet. She almost laughed from the strain, but her throat was too tight. Memphis stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth coming from him. I will discover the truth. About you, he said. And until I do, you will remain here, under my protection. Do not mistake that for freedom. Carol nodded slowly. I understand. He watched her for a long moment, as though expecting her to break down or beg, but she held her ground. Something flickered behind his expression, approval, maybe, or curiosity in a deeper form. Tomorrow, he said, turning toward the balcony, you will be questioned by my scribes. They will test your words. Your presence cannot remain unexplained. Carol lowered her gaze. I will tell them everything I know. He paused at the edge of the balcony. Good. And Carol, she looked up. Do not give my enemies reason to think you matter to me. They will use it against you. The warning slid into her chest like a cold breath. Before she could respond, he motioned to the guards waiting outside. The door opened, and 2 soldiers stepped in, ready to escort her back. Carol walked out of the chamber, her pulse still racing, her thoughts tangled between fear and the strange sense that something in the Pharaoh's eyes had shifted when he spoke to her. As the doors closed behind her, she realized the truth settling slowly over her shoulders. Her arrival had unsettled the palace. Her existence posed a question no one could answer yet. And Memphis, powerful and unpredictable, had just placed her at the center of it.